I will bring it back bigger and better and stronger than ever before, and we will make America great again. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hey there, Couch Explorers. It's Jason McCoy, your host and friendly guide to today's show. On Put 'em on the Couch, we're going to explore a very enigmatic topic, one that's mired in controversy and oftentimes misunderstanding. We call it the Trump effect. That's right. We're going to be asking all the questions specifically related to what makes Trump so popular, what's his appeal, why the rock star status, why almost the messianic following. Is there any precedent for understanding this? Is there any parallels historically? I'll turn to my co-host and confidant, Mr. Nelson, the poli-sci and history guy, to give us some more behind the scenes on that. So, what's the real magic behind this political enigma? Stick with us as we unpack this strange, twisted, and odd personality of a man. Today, on Put 'em on the Couch, the Trump effect. All right, we are back, ladies and gentlemen, and back in the studio beside me, I have my friend, confidant, and former bird watcher,
Nelson Boyer.
Mr. Nelson Boyer.
It's a golf thing. It's a golf thing. Hey, do you know what a hole-in-one on a par 4 is called?
Triple bogey.
It's a condor.
A condor, very nice.
Keeping the golf theme.
Listen, we don't do this enough, but I want to give a special shout out to our listeners, Nelson, for whom, if it weren't for, we wouldn't have this show.
No, we would, but it'd be like a tree falling in the woods. It'd be one of those weird metaphors.
Yeah. I want everyone to know that we've been doing this now nearly 8.5 months, and we are pushing right up against our first year's goal, which was 5,000 downloads. We are going to hit that number in the next couple weeks, specifically because of people like you. Thanks to those of you who have been listening. Thanks to those of you that have been sharing, liking, and listen, if I could ask a big favor, whether you listen on Spotify or Apple, please rate and review us. In fact, you don't even have to review us. Just hit one of those stars, preferably the 5th star, if you would. That actually helps create visibility on the Apple and Spotify playlist charts. Now, I want everyone to know I'm very excited. If you haven't already heard, Put 'em on the Couch broke into the top 100. Yes.
That's right.
Yes. Top 100 for science, social science last week. And, of course, we quickly went right out of the top 100, catapulting back out of even 200 for a while there. But, Nelson, I'm proud to say we are pushing right up against that 100
again. It's an upward
again.
trajectory.
We're pushing right up against that 100 mark. Hopefully we'll break back into the top 100 again with the help and support of listeners like you. Now, today on the show, what in the world is going on with Donald Trump?
What isn't going on
We
with
call
Donald
it the
Trump
effect.
What isn't going on with President Trump, former President Trump, future President Trump? I don't know. It seems like everything in politics revolves around the ideas and the opinions of a single person.
Yeah, it's almost like
manifested
he is
in millions.
the opposite side of the same coin. Taylor Swift's on one side and he's the other. It's the Trump effect and Taylor Swift effect, right?
Yeah,
that's
but
all
maybe
that's going on
in
right
some
now.
ways, maybe it's the same effect, right? I mean, we talked about Taylor Swift and people connecting with her because they saw something true in themselves. And I think that's true of a lot of movement politicians.
Yeah, I think you might be right. I think that too often people misunderstand, or maybe they don't take the time to appreciate that 50% of people can't be completely delusional or wrong.
That's true.
Trump has 50% of Americans supporting him in one way, shape, form, or fashion, right? I'm not saying they're all following the Trump cult. I'm not saying they're all delusional, but they are saying, you know what? We want to give him one more turn at this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming they see something in him.
Absolutely.
Something that obviously people like myself, admittedly, and maybe 50% of other Americans just absolutely don't see in him.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And look, part of that, I think, part of it, not all of it, part of it is the negative polarization that we see in our politics generally.
Sure.
This idea that doesn't matter who our guy is, we're voting against the other guy.
Yeah, and
I
that
think
way
that's
it's sort of like
particularly
a
true.
NFL football game, isn't it?
Yeah,
Doesn't matter who's on the
no.
team. I mean, it's just one jersey against another jersey. Who have you picked to be your team?
Yeah, but we still root for our jersey. We're not rooting for our jersey here. We're rooting against the other jersey, and that's an important distinction. Nobody is. I don't think any. I mean, now there are people.
There's
who,
a little revenge, a little rivalry in football. Come on now.
There are people who are rooting specifically for Donald Trump.
Right.
And maybe there are some who are rooting specifically for Joe Biden, but by and large,
against one
look at the polling. The American people hate this race, and yet they're into it. They're attuned to it. So this negative polarization, this otherism, this idea that the opposite party, the people with opposing values, opposing thoughts, are evil, are wrong. I mean, it's hyperheated, and it has been for a while. But Trump is like that blowhard air bag that lights the fire even further, that fans the flames.
So we love to hate. We love to hate. We love to root against.
I don't
we
love
love the
to
shade
hate.
and fraud. We like to own, I guess. You've heard the saying, own the libs. I haven't heard the saying, own the conservatives, but I have heard own the libs. What do you think this comes from? I mean, the Trump effect, in my mind, when I decided we would do something like this, and I came to you and I said, let's call it the Trump effect. Admittedly, it was kind of a gimmick. I said, well, we had the Taylor Swift effect, and that podcast episode did really well, so why don't we use the same thing and call it the Trump effect? But then as I began thinking about it a little more, I said, well, that might actually help focus us today as well. Certainly, when people think about the Trump effect, I think it's no doubt they think about the man and the politician, the image, the personality, right?
Right.
What does he have? What does he say? What does he feel? What does he do that is so appealing to so many? But I don't think we can do an episode like this without at least mentioning the opposite of that. So for every supporter that looks at Trump and goes, yep, I like that, or listens to him and says, yes, I like what he says, there's a detractor. There's some critic that says, ugh, see, that's what I'm talking about. He's a buffoon, or he's a liar, or he's a grifter, he's a con man. I think maybe you said it already. The Trump effect is this amazing ability, either purposefully or accidentally, that Trump possesses that helps either further polarize us or at least stay polarized.
Well, I think we're talking. So I think the polarization piece has nothing to do, or very little to do, with Trump, except that he amplifies it, right?
Okay, yeah.
I think we have.
We're already polarized.
I think we have to break the Trump effect into two separate camps. The people who absolutely, and maybe I don't really know what percentage this is, but the people who absolutely love President Trump,
they follow him as if he's the Messiah. He's the second coming,
right? Who, when he tweets on or Truth Socials, I don't know,
they're there.
or Truth's Social, I don't know how we say that.
Should only be one truth.
Unless he posts, when he posts on like Veterans Day, Happy Veterans Day to our great veterans. We promise to you we're going to root out the
evildoers,
vermin, the Marxists. What to me, that is horrifying. Like that is fascist language. There's
Those
no
people
question.
that like
that's fascist
that
language.
find that appealing.
But there's a group who are like, woo, do a pants off dance, who just can't believe this is so awesome. This is incredible.
Man. I like him.
I don't know what percentage of Trump supporters they make up.
I guess I don't think it really matters. I mean,
it does matter.
It's clearly less than 50% and no more than 50%.
But here's the thing: everybody who votes for Trump is not into
like
that.
No, but I don't think we'll ever get those. Right? I don't think the liberals will ever get those. I don't think there's anything we can do.
No.
At least not in our lifetime.
Those people are fully on board. They have bought in to every single thing that the president says. Fine.
Okay.
But how many people who are
holding
out there
their noses,
voting,
making
out there
excuses
voting
for him?
Exactly. What percent and what effect has he had on those people and on the broader political electorate? So I think there's two effects.
Yeah. Well, I would say,
what do you think?
One is very easy to dismiss and easy not to even try to come up with an explanation for, and easy not to even try to fight for, the soul of, right? And that's the ones that are the fanatics, the true believers, the zealots, right? Again, it's like trying to tell a Swiftie that Taylor Swift's not the greatest person ever. It's trying to tell a child that Santa doesn't exist, right? But the others, to your point, I guess these would be people who are Republicans by heart in some way, shape, form, or fashion. They are in some way, shape, form, or fashion an institutionalist, somewhat of an orthodox. They still think about some of the old Republican guard when they vote for Trump, and so they're thinking about in some way the grand old party, and maybe they're hanging in there and thinking, well, Trump is just one person.
8 years, that's a lot of hanging.
It is a lot of hanging, but
It's
I mean,
a
come
lot
on,
of
not true believers, but real fans of, say, the Republican Party, like a real fan of, I don't know, the Dallas Cowboys. You hang in there, right? You say, well, we'll ride, as Jerry Jones just said, we'll ride Dak Prescott as far as he can take us and no further. Likewise, maybe they're thinking we'll ride Trump as far as he'll take us. I mean, and what did he do? He did take them to the presidency. He did help them restore power in the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
He did,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he did
yeah.
do quite a few things that they want.
Yeah.
In terms, and when you talk about Wall Street, I mean, he played right into their hands.
So
donor class.
I've spoken to a number of evangelical Christians who, you have an obvious problem with his personal behavior, right?
One would think.
But here's what most of them, not all of them, most of them tell me.
Yeah.
That in order to fight evil, you need somebody who is not really bound by Christian principles.
They can't play by the rules.
They can't play by the rules.
Nobody else is playing by the rules.
So there's this appeal for a lot of evangelicals I have spoken to who do not approve of Trump's behavior.
Yeah, that's the Frankenstein's monster argument, isn't it?
I don't know. What's that argument?
Well, the Frankenstein monster argument, as I understand it, goes a little something like this. He's an idiot. He's a buffoon. He's a vile and vulgar person. He doesn't play by the rules. Maybe he is a con man and grifter, but he's ours.
Okay. I've never heard that before.
So likewise, the monster that Dr. Frankenstein created, right, in Dr. Frankenstein's eyes was his monster. Right? So again, you have heard that. You've heard things around the edges of that where people would say, look, Trump's just a vehicle. Trump's just the mouthpiece. Trump's just the show. Trump's just the celebrity, the personality. He's helped us garner power and more support. I mean, no doubt he's helped solidify this base like nobody has in my life.
Oh, absolutely.
Republican did not have a base like this.
He is a movement politician. I mean, and
a populist, if you want to use that term.
He's absolutely a populist, but definitely this is a movement, and movement politicians are far more powerful. They have far greater durability.
Now,
than
I do take
typical politicians.
I do take, I guess some not offense, but I'm a little concerned about the word movement here. You don't mean literally as in moving and shaping and shaking and growing, because I mean it is true that he has maybe grown the base a little bit when he first started. But I don't think there's any evidence that he's growing the base at all by this point. But he has solidified it to the point where you can be almost 100% sure that most of his voters are going to come out and vote for him, no matter what he does or what he says.
When I say movement, I'm talking about in the context of a hostile takeover of the former Republican Party.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
That is what I am talking about.
Yeah.
And it is nearly complete. I mean, think back to 2015 with Lindsey Graham swinging a golf club at a cell phone.
Yeah.
Right after Trump gave away Lindsey Graham's cell phone number. How funny is this?
Yeah.
Think back to Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz had his father's name dragged through the mud.
His own wife.
His own wife made fun of, right? Called Trump a sniveling coward, refused to endorse Trump at the convention, told people that they should vote for somebody who has honor and value.
And he has since
now he's
repented, kissed the ring, right?
He's a toady, right?
Yeah.
He's all in.
Yeah,
he is all in. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a movement. I'm talking about a grassroots group that is pushing and directing the elected masses to do as they want. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they make up a majority, but I know that if they're not a majority, the majority that does exist has proven incapable of redirecting the party in any direction that resembles the old guard that you spoke of.
So prior to Trump, did you or anyone you read say that there was room for more more energy, more movement, more strength, more of a voice in either party. Like prior to Trump, were there people out there going, look, the Republican Party could use a shot in the arm. The Democratic Party could use a shot in the arm.
I think you really have to go back to, I think Trump did not start he would tell you he started the MAGA movement. Of course, he came up. He didn't even come up with the phrase "Make America Great Again."
No, of course he didn't. That's recycled many times. That's been
used many, many times. So, I think you have to go back to 2009.
Okay.
And the beginnings of the Tea Party. Mm-hmm. And I really think that you have to look at the energy behind that movement, the anger behind that movement. And what I think President Trump did was, like I said, he fanned the flames. He tapped into it. He put some oxygen into that fire and watched it grow. And, he's leading the parade now. But I would say that question of, well, was there a way to energize the Republican Party, the Democratic Party? I would say
did people recognize
started,
that it needed it and that it could be done?
I would say 2009, 2010.
And have we seen anything like that, maybe other than Obama doing the same thing or similar thing to the Democratic Party? Well,
you've seen it throughout American history.
I just meant recently, relatively recently.
No, I would say Obama's a good analogy, and I don't want to confuse our listeners or to have some sort of false equivalency. I'm not saying that President Obama's appeal is
likened
to President Trump's. It's very different.
But it's still, if you want to compare it, there's an energy about both of them. There's almost a messianic sort of belief in these followers. There's maybe this, again, hope for tomorrow being different.
Yes, but I will say that because President Obama's the Democratic coalition today, and really since it started winning national elections on a consistent basis since 1992, the Democratic coalition is really varied, and you don't find a lot that binds them together. So very quickly after President Obama's victory, people thought hope and change meant whatever they thought it meant, and President Obama had different ideas.
Sure.
And I think Democrats became, disillusioned fairly quickly.
Right.
And dropped the messianic, appeal. There was a meteoric rise there. It was exciting to be a part of.
It didn't quite have the same staying power.
Didn't really have the same staying power because the policies are very different. And there was no enemy in the Obama movement. The enemy was cynicism, which, can't really be vanquished.
So going back to his supporters, we didn't really go into any detail about this, and I think we'd be remiss if we sort of glossed over this. But to my mind, the Trump effect has a lot to do with, again, Trump's appeal. And we're talking specifically about to any follower. You were mentioning that there's different kinds of Trump supporters, right? Well, let's just take the diehard supporters. What do you believe is the thing that they like most about him? What do they see in him? You said you've talked to some of them. What do they tell you? What can you glean from this rabid, zealous support?
I've talked to some tepid Trump supporters because I want to know. I just have an innate curiosity to find out what exactly is. How can you ignore these obvious personal flaws?
Right. It's clear you're holding your nose, flaws. Right? Yeah, and so maybe looking the other way sometimes.
How can you justify somebody who's civilly liable? That gets to that negative polarization that the other side is so dangerous.
They play the whataboutism.
Yeah.
card.
Well, the funny thing is they say things to me that, well, look how bad the squad is. Yeah, the squad hates Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is that Joe Biden is actually really a moderate politician,
right?
Despised by the left flank of his own party. Look at Israel and Hamas. Look at any number of policy differences they have with him. Look at this potential immigration package right now before the U.S. Senate. So there's this rejection of President Biden on the left, and then on the right, regardless of if you're big pro-Trump, tepid Trump, whatever. On the right, you have people who are saying, we can't have Joe Biden because of that far left.
Sure.
So I think that's his biggest problem. When you look at his poll numbers and stuff, I think that's his issue. I think people are just so afraid or made to fear the far left in this country that they'll take a President Trump as a necessary evil.
Well, I do talk to and hear from regularly those people that are more evangelical, more true Trump believers.
You talk to evangelicals who are true Trump believers?
Yeah. And let me tell you who they are. They are working class. They always have been working class. They're from, mostly the state of South Carolina. They're my high school friends and acquaintances. I still hear from them. I talk to some of them. I see their posts. Many of them listen to our podcast, right? And I want to be very delicate and very respectful of them. They're smart people. They're hardworking people. They are God-fearing people. And like myself, they grew up knowing the value of hard work and knowing the value of friends and family and trust. They do the absolute best they can to get by. They love their children. And here's what I glean from them. They don't feel like they have to put on airs. They don't feel like they have to get rid of any part of themselves. They don't feel like they have to forget anything about being an American. They don't have to apologize for being from the South. They don't feel like Trump's going to hold them responsible for any of our nation's past indiscretions. They are tired of, as many would call them, the liberal elites, the academics, of which I probably slightly represent now, making them feel bad about themselves when honestly all they've ever known is hard work, love, their faith, their family, their friends. Like, they don't see themselves as misogynistic. They don't see themselves as domestic terrorists. They don't see themselves as toxic or they don't see themselves the way Hillary Clinton described them, as deplorable.
Yeah, I'm really glad you. I'm really glad you brought that up. I'd be remiss
if I didn't mention that.
I'm really glad you brought that comment up, because I think that's an important point. I think a lot of Trump supporters, the tepid ones and the all-in, do feel aggrieved somehow. And I think that comment of DePore really reflected that. That played right into Trump's narrative.
Yeah, if you're already having a bad day, right?
Yeah.
You're already having a bad day, bad life, bad year, whatever it is. You don't believe the cards have ever been in your favor.
Exactly.
You've never felt privileged. Well, and now you're being told, if you are straight, cis, male, white, have a job, have kids who are healthy, have a car, doesn't matter what you've had to go through to get all that stuff. Doesn't matter how you're barely hanging on. You need to bend down and kiss the rings of the liberal elites, and you need to be happy.
Do you think that is a message that is out there in the far left, on the political left, in the elite camp? Do you think that's a message?
I've felt it all my life when I was growing up in South Carolina.
Do you think is it overt or is it subtle? How is it there?
It's just
because I've never heard anybody say it.
It's both. Okay. It's both. It's a way that liberals talk to you, not with you. It's a way that academics use their body language in almost a judgmental way. It's the clothing. It's the way
the tweed jacket.
Everything. It's the odd manner in which they carry themselves. Like it's hard to articulate, but I see it. When I see it, I know it, right? Like, I absolutely know it. It's cringy. To use my friend Phil McCaskey, his quote, he said that liberals are seen as do-gooders, squares, people that are the antithesis of fun.
Hippies?
I don't know. Phil McCaskey didn't have a problem with liberalism in general. He had a problem with people pretending to be more righteous than they really are, smarter than they really are, And again, how dare you look down upon me? How dare you make me feel like I'm less than a person?
I understand.
And how dare
that.
you assume you've got my vote just because we're the same skin color or just because, yeah. So I wanted to mention that.
I do understand that, and
so I don't think they
understand.
think Trump is smart. I don't think they necessarily think Trump is God fearing. I don't think they think Trump is in shape. They just
Not.
right. None of that stuff.
I definitely understand that, and there has always been in American political history this vein of populism that some politicians have tried to tap into, have tapped into to varying degrees. But usually what happens in a healthy democracy is the political parties stop that. And they guard against that. I know
they
lot
only
of
let
Trump
it go so
supporters,
far. Maybe
a
the
lot of-
primary, and then after that, they're like, okay, guys, let's come together.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, and again, is that elitist, this idea of parties as gatekeepers? Yeah, perhaps.
You mean civility? Civility is not elitist, but sometimes it might be viewed as.
Well, what's the point of a political party if not to? It's not there to give in to every whim. It's there to make sure that the candidates that represent it are representing good values.
But it is strange, isn't it? It reminds me of a court of law where if you're a witness, a juror, I should say, and someone says something out of pocket, out of turn, that is just completely and utterly either false or beside the point, and the defense says, you know what? I object, Your Honor. The jury shouldn't hear that. That has nothing to do with this case. And the judge says, you're right, sustained. We're going to strike that from the record. And it's as if the jury's supposed to go, you know what? That never happened. I'm not even going to let that figure into my deliberation. Now, stay with me.
They used to be able to do that, though.
That's still kind of an illusion. You really can't do that. Like, you can't strike that once you've heard it. Likewise, how long? I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a political historian. You're more of that, and maybe you can speak to this. But how long have we just accepted that primaries can be knockdown, drag out fights, that it's not only okay, but it's actually expected? You're supposed to strike one another and draw blood. You're supposed to leave it all out there during the primary, and then somehow magically we're supposed to strike all that from the record and come together and go, oh, we were just acting. Now it's time to really govern like adults. I'll ask you.
So when I was speaking about parties as gatekeepers, I was talking about before 1968.
Okay, help
Because
me.
1968 was when the primary process began.
Oh, really?
1968 was not. It began in 72 as a result of some of the chaos surrounding 68. In 68, that's the year Kennedy was shot.
Okay.
Robert Kennedy was shot after winning the California primary. But primaries weren't the primary way in which we selected our presidential nominees. They had them. People ran in them, but some delegates were awarded based on primaries, but the vast majority were not. The parties would get together at the convention. They would figure out what direction they wanted to go, what horse they were going to back. These were, this is the smoke-filled room. Right?
So it wasn't like the people were selecting the candidate.
No,
It was more like the party was.
The party elites were.
Okay.
And so when you say, well, you can't strike that from the record, you heard of it, the role of the party, to use your metaphor, would be to disallow somebody from saying it in the first place.
The judge, yeah.
So, no, saying the thing that needed to be stricken.
Oh, wow.
That's what parties were there for, right? You can't say the awful thing that you might be thinking or
They were
feeling.
handling, they were managing.
Absolutely.
And they were going to pick the right candidate who wouldn't say those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Because civility was, I guess, just assumed. That's like a bedrock. That's a principle that was just assumed.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then in 70...
And that doesn't seem like that long ago.
It wasn't. And then in 72, right?
Year I was born.
We start with the primary process. Jimmy Carter was really the first president in 76, the first candidate to use Iowa, New Hampshire, to use the early primary states to sort of catapult his candidacy. He was a very, not a well-known governor from a southern state, but he used that primary to introduce himself to the American people, and candidates have done that ever since. Now, the parties still had a big role to play. They had super delegates on both sides for a while. I think the Republicans got rid of theirs first. The Democrats kept some version of theirs. The primaries have changed slightly ever since. But in the age of social media, you don't really need to build the same campaign infrastructure that you did before. And Iowa and New Hampshire, those primaries have sort of been nationalized themselves. So I guess Trump, the idea of a Trump-type candidate, a celebrity-type candidate, really started to take shape, I think, with President Obama. He was a celebrity-type candidate. His candidacy became far bigger than anything he'd accomplished.
Certainly
anything he
bigger than
did,
him, right.
Right. And then in 2016, sort of that same thing played out on the Republican side, where it was a movement. It was this big thing, and it sort of took on a life of its own.
And I guess to a lesser extent, maybe Reagan as well, right? He was somewhat of a celebrity.
Yeah.
Again, kind of a milquetoast celebrity. He wasn't a big-time actor in Hollywood, but he was pretty well known.
Right. No, but it was the same. But but I'd caution there. Reagan had done a number of things. He'd been involved in Republican politics since the early 60s.
I see. He didn't come out of nowhere.
No,
He
was the
didn't
governor,
just come out of Hollywood.
He was the governor of California.
Yeah, governor. And Obama was just a state senator, right?
He was a state senator. He'd been a senator for 4 years, or actually been a senator for two years when
Before
he started
that,
running.
really just a political activist or something, right? Before that, he was just kind of out there
he was
canvassing
a community
and
organizer,
community
but state senator. He's, I mean, certainly a very talented and ambitious politician. That's fine, but
with a meteoric rise to fame. I mean,
yeah, but it does dovetail so nicely, doesn't it? I mean, look, 2000, 2004, you had small dollar donations, campaigns had raised on campaign websites, so you had some of that. But in 2008, 2012, I mean, the digital campaign, the online campaign, became as big as the traditional infrastructured campaign. I remember in 2008, Obama announcing his running mate via text to his supporters, which was like, whoa. It was, I believe it came, I had a 6-month-old daughter. The text came at 5:30 in the morning.
How about
Thank
that?
you, Mr. President. Yeah, I mean,
and that's cool, right? It's
it wasn't cool because CNN had it leaked that it was going to be Joe Biden. So there was this big debate at campaign headquarters. Do we wake up our supporters with the news like we wanted to, or let CNN break it?
Yeah.
So they ended up releasing it. It might have been like 4:30 in the morning because it was Central Time. But I do want to get back into some of the more rabid Trump supporters, and I do want to talk about maybe some historical parallels and the racial element to the Trump effect.
Yeah, let's do that right after break.
They want a strong man. They want to own the libs. They want to take out their opponents. They don't want to hang out with people who look like me. They don't.
So, yeah, we're back. If you've been listening, or if you haven't been listening, thanks for joining us. We're talking about the Trump effect and specifically kind of trying to focus in on what is this appeal that Trump supporters
I mean, besides his incredibly good looks.
Yeah. Besides
this
his incredibly
guy
good looks
is dead sexy.
and his fit, svelte body, what is it that people are drawn to, right?
Yeah.
And again, Nelson was saying on the other side, we have to be careful not to lump all of Trump's supporters or followers into the same basket, right? Some of them are, in fact, diehard, rabid, almost religious cult-like followers, but perhaps the overwhelming majority of them are a bit more tepid, a bit more skeptical of Trump, and that's what we're trying to sort of understand but nevertheless, they're going to vote for him, whether it be holding their nose, whether it be saying, well, the other, in this case, insert any popular liberal you want, especially Joe Biden, they're not doing any better. In fact, they're doing worse. If you're worried about America, then you got to get rid of those woke, liberal, elite politicians first and foremost. And Trump will just be one of many to come, right? He's just a place filler.
There have been Trump supporters I've heard recently during the primary who said that Trump is just Trump.
Yeah, he's
the
just...
MAGA movement is much bigger than him now.
He's just a vehicle. He's a conduit.
He's just a vehicle. The MAGA movement. And that's why I said you kind of go back to that Tea Party, And I did want to get into some of the racial elements here because when you talk about American politics, race is an unavoidable subtopic. We have to address it. In 1900, the country was and remained an overwhelmingly white Judeo-Christian country. 88% of Americans were white, and they were either Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish. That was the reality.
And so we are moving more towards a multiracial, multi-ethnic
Absolutely.
populace.
And if we look back through history, we can see a parallel where that happened before.
How so?
And it was accompanied by civil unrest, by political movements, and by violence.
But isn't it true, the time period you're talking about in particular was when it was sort of into law. It was codified. It was these disenfranchisement of people of color, and I guess you can even extend that to women. For most of our history, was law. I mean, it was codified. Like I said, it was something that the power.
What time period do you think I'm speaking about?
Oh, I'm thinking about 1900 until 1960s, 1970s.
No. I'm talking about the period where the law hadn't been written yet. I'm talking about Reconstruction in the American South.
Okay.
And what we find is that states, and put 1898 to the side, states like North Carolina, where the white population was still really dominant, right?
Okay.
They had a lower population of black people. Areas, even within states, that the white population remained dominant, but they introduced a new, let's say 20% or 15% African-American population into the civic life of the area.
Yeah.
No problem.
By introduce, you mean people are now accepting of other groups.
I didn't say
following the Civil War.
accepting. I mean that they recognized a civic right to this new group to exist and participate. But 15%, 20% is not threatening to the majority.
No.
Areas in South Carolina, areas in Mississippi, areas in Georgia, where the black population in some areas became the dominant population. In some areas, it was close to 50-50. That was felt by the white population in the area,
The majority.
as threatening. And it was perceived as threatening, and it was responded to as a threat. It was responded to many times with violence.
Yeah.
It's in areas, the Klan's
And that certainly
presence.
culminated within most of our lifetimes, the lifetime of the listeners, right? At least their parents, grandparents, again, around the 1960s. Culminating
Yeah, I would say that
into the Civil Rights Act.
no, because I would say that we had much better race relations between 1866 and 1880.
Even though African Americans didn't have the same rights they acquired in the 60s and didn't have the same, they weren't counted the same.
They were protected militarily. No,
Okay.
they had, look at the 1866 Civil Rights Act, the 14th Amendment.
They couldn't vote, Nelson, is what I'm saying.
They could. They absolutely could. They had the 15th Amendment.
On paper, but
Jim Crow didn't really start until after segregation ended. So you're talking about 1880, 1890. That's when you get Jim Crow, and you get a lack of rights. Here's an interesting number for you, because we mentioned 1898. 120,000 blacks could vote in North Carolina in 1898. In 1900, fewer than 6,000 blacks could vote.
in North Carolina.
Yes.
Yeah, following the coup d'etat in 1898 Wilmington.
Well, it's because it wasn't just kept in Wilmington. It was
It spread, yeah.
Yeah, it was, and the coup itself didn't spread, but the idea that we have to get black voters off the rolls, we can't allow these things.
We got to get black politicians out of office. We got to get black landowners or business owners out of power.
So if you follow the population of
Dynamics,
the population percentage of black to white people, the closer it gets to 50-50 or a black majority, the more violent and active the Klan was during the Reconstruction period.
Well, I want to get to today, right? Because that's what I know most about, and most of my listeners, people I grew up with, are living in today, right? They've been born in the 1960s, 70s, and here they are 50, 60 years old. I know for a fact, having lived in South Carolina for 17 years of my life, and again, many of our listeners having lived there all their lives, now 50, 60 years old, they would say, yeah, in our own hometown, it's been closer to 50-50 black and white as long as we can remember, from elementary school to now. And we haven't had any of this toxicity that's described. We haven't had any of these race problems that's described. We haven't had mass movements in our community. We haven't had the Klan come through. Now, some of my African American friends and listeners might disagree with me, but I didn't see problems with race growing up the same way, again, the elites describe the South.
Yeah.
I really didn't.
And I should be, I should clarify when I'm talking about the Klan, I'm not saying that the MAGA movement in particular or the moment we find ourselves in is violent.
Reestablishing the Klan or is violent.
No, I'm not saying it's
or
violent.
That the followers are.
I'm saying there is a response of
a tinge.
No. I need to maintain the things that I have and the things that I value, which you spoke to earlier.
Yeah.
This idea of it's okay to be a white Southern redneck who works his ass off to get the things.
And so there's a tinge of racism, and maybe again, is it racism that it's tinged with, or is it protectionism?
I think it's protectionism.
Is it isolationism?
I don't think it hinges on this idea of one race being better or worse than another. I think it's protectionism.
And so if you already live in a community where there are not a lot of minorities, and you start saying, I want to make the world like my community, one couldn't help but to assume what that means, at least in part, is that you want to keep it really white, right?
Well, maybe
really white like you.
Maybe you can speak to that from a psychological perspective. Is there a desire? Is there something innate
about
in
us
wanting
and them
to
and protecting your own?
Protecting your own? Like,
well,
what is that?
absolutely.
Where's that come from? What part of the brain is that?
Well, I think it's some of the older parts of the brain, the part of the brain that evolved
The limbic brain.
first. Yeah, way more limbic. I mean, it's basically a set of structures that operate, if you want to liken it to a mathematical algorithm, operate on this algorithm that is very quick. What the famous economist Danny Kahneman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, calls System 1. He said it's fast, it's intuitive, it's life-sustaining, but it doesn't always get things right. It's just kind of the best guess in the moment. And that's all we had throughout most of evolutionary history, right? We didn't have these slow, deliberative circuits that we liken to sort of the cortex or the frontal part of the brain. We had these old limbic midbrain structures for most part. We still have those, by the way, but we just have the
sexy
the stuff on
neocortex.
top, right? We have that on top that's supposed to try to keep all that stuff at the bottom at bay. And again, I kind of liken the stuff at the top to the liberal elites, right? Like, no matter how hungry you are, no matter how poor you feel, no matter how disenfranchised you feel, no matter how upset you get, there are those fancy liberals, that cortex saying, oh, but you've got it pretty good.
It's so interesting that we're circling around this, right? Because politics is, in essence, it's a battle of resources, right?
Yeah.
Deciding and divvying up who gets
I'm
what,
glad
when,
you
and
said
how.
that. Yeah.
And
I asked you that a long time ago. I said,
Yeah.
what is so sexy about politics? What is at its heart? What is politics? And you described it as that, right? Back up and say that again, if you would.
So politics, it's at the essence of politics, at its heart, is a battle of shared resources, deciding who gets what, when, and how.
Okay.
Right? And so it's always going to be contentious. Always.
It's always going to be us versus
We
them.
might have agreements within that contention. It might be like, oh, okay, well, that works out fine. But it always starts as some sort of disagreement or contention.
So it's a perpetual negotiation.
Yes.
It has to be.
And how does President Trump talk about negotiation?
Oh, that's
right?
for losers.
Exactly. There's winners and losers. There's
That's
people
for
who
losers.
are screwing you over and people who are
Taking and not
behind,
helping and not giving back.
and then people who help you. So it's very either or. It's all or nothing with President Trump. You're
black
either
and white.
getting screwed over by China or China is a
There's
friend.
no nuance. There's no complexity.
There's no complexity.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people look at that and say, that's how I feel too.
Yeah.
That's how I understand things. Finally, somebody's speaking up for people like me.
Yeah, 100%. Well, if and when you ask me what my thoughts are as a psychology person, I'd like to speak directly to what you just brought up.
Yeah. Please explain that. Like, expound on that a little bit.
So I am, by training, a person interested in clinical psychology. However, I still have other interests. And one of the things that I've been interested in and I occasionally teach is developmental psychology. And all that is a look at the lifespan from before birth all the way to death, specifically looking at physical development, changes, right? psychological development changes, social, I mean, you name it. It's sort of a psycho-biological, emotional lens through which we look at the whole lifespan. And one of the things I learned many, many years ago in my undergraduate was a thing called parenting style. It seems that 40 or 50 years ago, a lady named Diane Bommerin was very interested in learning about the style of parents that are out there in the U.S. in particular. And she found that, there were different ways or styles, approaches to being a parent. And she lumped them into a couple categories. One was a neglectful parent. Permissive. It was not really neglectful. It's more permissive, right? You just kind of be your kid's friend from the beginning to the end. You let them do whatever they want. And if they ask for it and you can do it, you do it, right? And you really can't be bothered with parenting too much. You don't want to get into the nuance. You don't want to parent so much. Maybe you're working too hard. Maybe you're preoccupied. Maybe you're young and don't know any better and you're raising kids and you're a kid yourself, whatever. So let's say that made up 10 or 15% of parents. I may be actually overshooting it. I'm not a developmental psychologist. Another parenting style she found was called the authoritative parent. And she saw this one as the best parent. And,
really?
And you can already see sort of the liberalism that's tinged in this, right?
Sure.
I don't know that Diane Bommerin was a liberal or an outspoken progressive in and of herself, but she was by today's standard, an academic, so I guess she was. She said the authoritative parents are more diplomatic. They are more couth. They're more progressive. They're more, I'm going to parent.
And why are they called authoritative?
I'll give it to you.
Democratic
No. They're authoritative in the sense that they do know a little bit more. They can help you find the answers. They are good at negotiating. They're good at diplomacy. They are teachers. They're parents, they're friends, they're all of it, right? They wear all the hats.
You sound like you're talking about me.
Yeah. So what happens is, the kid gets in trouble, and you and the kid decides, well, was there a rule about that? Was that rule clear? What should the punishment be? If you need to create a rule, you guys negotiate, and so they have to be held responsible. But you remind them as to why. And how this is going to affect them long term. It's a teaching moment, right?
Yeah, sure.
You're not there to just make them fear you. You're there to make them trust, respect the whole process.
Yeah, got it.
And the belief, according to Diane Bomerin's research, was that maybe, 50%, 60% of Americans were doing this.
Good.
Great. Then she found a third category. Maybe this third category represented twice as much as the permissive, maybe 3 times as much. It wasn't as much as the authoritative, right? It wasn't 50 or 60%, but maybe let's say it was 25, 30. And these were called,
guess what these are.
These were called, you can probably guess it.
Yeah, probably authoritarian parents.
They were called authoritarian parents.
Okay.
And who were these authoritarian parents? Well, she never said who they were religiously or politically, right? But you might actually start to imagine who they were. She said, these are people who say, do what I say, do it now or else. And the idea is that you get some pretty fast results.
Yeah.
Now, the belief was you got fast results because it was a really good way to parent, right? I mean, look at these authoritative parents. They're not getting the results I'm getting immediately.
Yeah.
They're sitting there negotiating for an hour with their kids about bedtime. I just say, go to bed now,
or it's
I'm
an
gonna
ass
throw
whooping.
you out. It's an ass whooping, or I'm gonna throw you outside. Oh, you don't want to do what I say? Then I'm going to take your toy and crush it in front of you, right?
Yeah.
And it's not.
I'm going to break your phone.
And by the way, don't cry when I'm spanking you, or else I'll give you something to cry about. This is hurting me more than it's hurting you. I got to teach you a lesson. My first job as a parent is to make sure I teach you how to be a good adult.
So
right?
if I was...
So it's spare the rod, spoil the child. Getting back to sort of parenting 101. It's pretty old school, right? Yeah. Now, what do we think? I mean, I don't have any empirical data. But what do we think the average working class Southerner grew up with? Was it more permissive, do we think? Was it more authoritative?
I mean, I would guess it was more authoritarian.
And
but
even in my own household, right, it was more authoritarian, especially from my dad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. My dad threw a cup of water on me when I didn't get up out of bed.
My dad threw a couple of leather belts on my backside, right? Now, I look back on that and I wonder, am I the person I am now because he did that to me or in spite of it? I like to believe that I'm the person I am now. By the way, a person who's never spanked his kids. Don't feel like I have to.
Never spanked.
Never.
Never spanked.
So I actually believe I'm the person I am in spite of some of the parenting. I would call them, I don't want to call them blunders or mistakes, but I think they were overkill, so to speak.
Sure,
I don't think it was
yeah,
necessary. You probably could have found something else. Now, being raised poor, I didn't have a whole lot for him to take away. So maybe it was easy. You know, you look around my house and you go, well, I could spank my kid really quickly, or I could just take away their Nintendo Switch, or I could take away their access to the internet, or I could take away their bike or their four-wheeler or their, right? There's so many things my kids have and love that maybe it's just easier being authoritative. I don't know.
Yeah.
Authoritative for me.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you're talking about this in a political context because there is not, I don't want to call it a theory, but there is language about Democrats and Republicans.
Well, really quickly before I forget, the sort of the punchline, if you will. Perhaps in sort of a psychoanalytic Freudian type way, I don't typically do this, right? In kind of a family dynamics theory way. Trump's authoritarianism, whether you believe it's explicit or you believe it's just, you know, who he is based on his upbringing or maybe who he's become because of his handlers, it might be triggering, especially working class cisgender males from the South. It may be triggering people from rural America.
Yeah, definitely.
Who grew up
definitely
in that kind of family dynamic. It might be triggering them. And so it might be a recapitulation of the old family dynamics. I want to say this. I'm not suggesting that if your parent rules with an iron fist, it's bad in and of itself. I'm not suggesting that it's neglect or abuse, right? I think a lot of liberals do.
No,
you leave a bruise or you know, that's
spank,
child abuse. You spank,
yeah,
that's child abuse.
yeah,
They should come in and investigate you if your kid says that they are scared of dad, right? What I'm saying, however, is that it's just the way it was. And it does seem like it worked because, again, 99.999% of my friends from Abbeville, South Carolina are good people. And I would dare say 90% of them were whipped.
Okay, but wait a minute. Now,
and so they are putting those two together. They're putting those two together. They're saying, I am the person I am because I was whipped. I am the person I am because I feared my parents or I feared God or I feared whatever else. I am part of that 001 that left, went to college, have not been back, and I can kind of see both sides.
Would you say, and I definitely don't think it's a, you know, like you said, it's not a one for one. It's not, I was whipped, I'm a Trump supporter or something.
Right. No.
Now, would you say that the 99.9% included both white and black families?
Yeah.
Because
in fact,
it is interesting that Trump's support among black Americans is growing.
As well as Hispanics.
As well as Hispanics.
I can actually speak to that as well. A lady named Vicki Williams, who was a professor at Georgia when I was a grad student. Vicki, I would love it if you were listening to the show and could call me sometime. I'd love to talk to you more about this. But Vicki Williams' research, when she was a PhD candidate, she was looking at parenting styles. She was a developmental psychologist. And I learned when she started teaching at my school, after she got her PhD, that she had been looking at African-American families' parenting styles. And she had found a higher than expected percentage of African-American parents were using an authoritarian style. Now, there are lots of explanations for why this was. It was thought to be, again, fast, simple, easy to follow, lazy.
You said it could be connected to poverty.
It's more about, the idea was that it was, again, lazy, easy, fast, quick, not a lot of thought. It could be administered cheaply, right?
Right, sure.
But she found exactly that, Nelson. People who were poor, people who were in working class families, African Americans who were living in places where it was dangerous to go outside. There was gang influence outside, maybe living in housing, what are they called?
Projects?
I don't want to call it projects. They call it subsidized housing, whatever.
Yeah, subsidized housing.
But again, she found that parents who were raising children in more precarious circumstances, right, financially, environmentally, were using authoritarian style parenting styles. And when they were asked, they would explain things like, I can't negotiate. I don't have the time for that. The risk is too great for showing my kids systematically why what I'm saying matters. I have to make them fear
They
me
just have to
because
get
the
it.
consequences
They just have to
are
get it.
you
Yep.
don't survive, right? So
Right.
it's kind of like the most liberal parents on this earth, if they saw their kids running out into traffic and all they had to stop them was a BB gun, they might shoot their kid. Or if they had a ball, they might throw the ball at their kid, right? By any means necessary to stop something worse from happening.
Right.
Again, it's a privilege, Vicki Williams might say.
To be authoritative.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that might be what liberals don't understand, is that it's a privilege to even think the way liberals do. It's a privilege to live the way liberals do.
I think that speaks to the fraying coalition a little bit of the Democratic Party, is that you have this white liberal elite, very, very privileged group, and I feel like the values that group has, the ideas that they have, the things that they want to accomplish, are not necessarily the things that the black coalition in the Democratic Party wants to accomplish, or the Hispanic coalition that has made up the Democratic Party wants to accomplish. So I do think there is that divergence that you're.
And what's worse is they just assume that you will vote for them because you always have, I guess.
Yes, that's so true.
And
that is so true.
So irresponsible. It's so how would I say it? It's a yucky feeling. If I'm Hispanic or if I'm a black,
condescending.
Condescending.
It's condescending.
That's the word I'm thinking about.
It's condescending, and I think President Trump, either through either directly, either with forethought and with conscience, or just accidentally, is
tapping into
somehow tapping into that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So having said all that, I think we've figured out the problem.
You
Not
think
the
so?
I think
we
we've
might have a
figured out.
diagnosis on the Trump effect?
But do you feel better about the effect of Donald Trump? Do you feel, because as a political scientist, I worry deeply
yeah. Am
about.
I as worried since I know the people that seem to like him and support him?
I mean, do you see a threat to the democratic order, to the democratic system, when somebody says literally, we need to suspend the Constitution to address these type of problems?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you more concerned because you understand the support that is behind this movement?
That's a great question. I really need to think about that and be measured with my response. I don't want to just come right off the cuff and offend anyone or be misunderstood. So this is probably one of the first times you've made me speechless. What I can say for those that feel like I should say something is this. I believe that the people I know and I grew up with are good people. I don't believe they would hurt anybody purposefully. I don't even know that they'd hurt anybody accidentally. I think because at the end of the day, many of them are about attention and bluster like most of us. I say this with all sincerity. My grandpa, rest his soul, he would be about 93 years old today if he were still alive. I can't think of a better man. Most people that knew him, liberal or conservative, MAGA or ultra-liberal, probably would say the same about him. However, if you didn't know him at all, but you only looked at the surface of the man, you might think he was simple, vile, a deplorable.
Mm-hmm.
But having known him, not just having been his grandson, but having known him and having really, long drawn out conversations about everything from politics to God to how you should treat people to marriage, I can tell you that he had a soul. He loved people. He believed in capitalism, free markets. He believed in community. He believed in, all of the things that both liberals and conservatives espouse. Same way with my father, same way with many of my relatives, and many, again, of my friends and their relatives. They like simple answers because they genuinely believe it is simple. They believe that, college and elites and liberalism and wokeism is just overcomplicating things. Again, my father-in-law rest his soul. He was a very liberal guy, very educated guy. Grew up in the South, North Carolina, moved to Indiana, back to North Carolina, but at his heart, he believed things were simple too. He really did believe that if you steal, you just chop off someone's hand. You know, he really did believe that the worst thing you could ever do is lie to him. He really did believe that there were more opportunities for rich people than poor people. He really did believe that both Democrats and Republicans didn't really care about the working class. He really did believe all of these things that so many of us believe. And so, will Trump's followers take us down a road of authoritarianism? Will there be an autocracy? Will there be violence? Will we go back and start imprisoning people that don't look like us and start enslaving people? I don't want to believe that's true. I don't think that's possible. I really don't. Again, if it is, I don't think it's going to come from these people I know and love and respect from my hometown, who are, by the way, pretty simple folk, God-fearing, and who really do believe in Donald Trump.
Yeah, sure. Sure.
But I don't think they would. Just, again, growing up with them all my life.
But there are some people who do believe that the country needs
a cleansing,
a beating,
yeah,
a strong man.
Yeah,
you know, I've seen supporters.
But I don't know. Yes, I don't know if it's metaphorical or if it's legit. Look, here's the thing I would say: is there a subsection of people who are really toxic, violent, misogynistic, racist, KKK, whatever? Right? Yes. Do they come out of the South? Perhaps. But do you
Not
also,
necessarily.
But do you also find them in other places?
Oh, yeah.
Do they come out of conservative or now MAGA quadrants, so to speak? Yes, but they also come out of other places, right? So,
yeah.
So we know they're everywhere. I don't want to believe there's just necessarily that many more of them. Again, I believe there's a lot of bluster, there's a lot of chest pounding, but I don't know that it's genuine. Like, I don't know that it's sincere. When someone says, build a wall and don't let anybody in our country, but now I don't even think the average person who says that really means or understands it. I can hear my grandpa saying something like that right now.
But now they are talking about, you know, in a second term, using deadly force at the border.
Yeah.
And do you think that the people who today are saying build a wall,
maybe if we keep it,
are going to be like, oh, well, it's necessary.
If they can keep it,
it's a slow drip.
If they can
sometimes.
keep it dark, if they can keep it away from people's vision like they do the death penalty, yeah, maybe it can happen.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think people would support the death penalty if they watched people die. That's why they do it under the cloak of night, and they do it with just a couple of witnesses. I don't think average person. But yeah, I know what you're saying. Recently, the Young Turks went to New Hampshire. Yeah, they went to New Hampshire and were asking some of Trump's voters a simple question. Let me play this for you.
Would you rather have 4 years of Donald Trump as a dictator or 4 years of President Biden reelected?
You know, you don't have to like the words that come out of the man's mouth, but sometimes in life we all need a good paddling from the principal to set our life on the right track. And this country does need a little bit of that. We need a little paddling. I mean, I was a problem child growing up, and it took a good leadership to set me straight. So I think our country does need some of that. So I hands down believe people wanted it 4 years ago, 3 years ago. So.
And Nelson, I don't think he literally means we need a dictator, but he does believe in corporal punishment.
Sure.
Right? And he reminds me of everyone I grew up with right now. He reminds me of everyone's father that I grew up with. He looks like just your average dad, your blue-collar American, doesn't he?
And I totally agree with you. Yeah. I don't think people want executions at the border. Nah. But here's where I get concerned, is a lot of people don't really understand, especially people who don't have time to understand how complex our system of government is and how vulnerable it can be. Yeah. So where today you might say, I need a little paddling.
Yeah.
And
Tomorrow, a little more.
And tomorrow the president says, okay, well, the election was stolen, so now we have to go and seize voting machines.
Take back
voting machines from states. Well, maybe that's a little harder than I wanted to paddle, but that's still
okay.
in the
Can make it
vein
okay.
of yeah.
Yeah, and you are right. I mean, again, we did in fact see something similar to that happen. We got really close to that happening on January 6th.
Sure.
Right? But again, I would say most of the people there were probably relatively normal, run-of-the-mill Americans, at least the ones standing out. I can believe that.
That's definitely true.
I can believe it. The ones that stormed the Capitol, they are the extremists. And again, I think what worries most people is they don't know how many of those type people are out there. And maybe worse, how many people who are not extreme, like this guy we just heard from New Hampshire, could be made extreme.
Well,
what would it take to get them to go into the Capitol?
That's the scary thing is if you look at the people who went in and have been charged, most of them weren't
seem pretty normal.
Most of them weren't even political a year ago or 2 years ago.
Now that's a whole nother question, right?
Right. I mean, so that's sort of speaking to some of this effect.
Yeah, maybe that is. So, you ready for it?
I am ready for the diagnosis of the Trump effect. But before we get there, I do want to, I want to echo your thanks earlier for our listeners. And B, I do want to emphasize that whatever your political beliefs, this in no way was intended to belittle or to make fun of.
Or to cheerlead for either side.
This is a legitimate exploration of a question that a lot of people have, which is why do people support somebody who has what I would say are obvious character flaws? I think most people would agree there's obvious character flaws. Obviously so different than anything we've had before.
Well, what I wanted to do was for so many of my listeners, both the ones that have been listening as well as the ones that maybe will listen to this one and maybe many others afterwards, is I wanted to model the kind of discourse that we engage in the classroom. I guess I want to give people a sense of what a classroom looks like in college, at least my college classrooms, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think it's indoctrination. A lot of people think, oh my God, well, if you are a liberal, how could you ever say anything nice or neutral, Jason, about, quote, the other side? And I hope people realize how easy it was for me today to just dialogue, even though we are too
don't say safe space.
We're too admittedly, we're two pretty progressive, tolerant, liberal Democrats here. But it's not really that hard to find common ground. It's not really that hard to understand if you're willing to ask the sincere, honest question, why?
Yeah.
You know?
So what's the diagnosis?
So it's tempting because of my background in education, because of the circles I've run in, because of the podcast and the people I listen to sort of fall into the same trap that everybody else does. Let's try to understand Donald Trump. Let's try to break down, dissect his appeal. One of my favorite commentarists, Scott Adams, he's a political science professor, I think, from NYU. He writes and speaks pretty eloquently and very matter-of-factly as well. And he says that Trump is a master salesman, persuader. That the reason Trump has such appeal is because he's using techniques, he's using an approach that is just spot on, 100%, perfect persuasion. And I have to admit, I look at Trump and I think to myself, the absolute opposite. Nothing he says, nothing he does, nothing about the man, from his ill-fitting suits to his weird bronzed skin, to his chubby little glistening hands, make me believe anything he says.
So he's not persuasive to you?
No, in fact, it's the direct opposite. Not only that, I don't believe there's anything virtuous about him, right? I don't believe that any human virtue that we aspire to, wisdom, curiosity, tolerance, community, anything, I don't believe there's any there. So you may wonder, how does he do it? Well, one of my favorite things to think about, watch, and use as an analogy in my classrooms is magic. Specifically prestidigitation. This is the fancy word for a sleight of hand. And I don't know if you've ever really thought about what it takes to be a good magician, especially a prestidigitator, a sleight of hand magician.
Is this like a vanish? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what it takes is 3 components. The first component is called the show, right? And the show is, let me see your cards. Let me see your hands. Let me see your hat. In Donald Trump's case,
Your
let me
little
see the
hands.
man. Let me see your riches. Let me see the Trump Tower. Let me see your friends. Let me see you come down that gold escalator. That was the show. Then there's the turn. And the turn is seemingly the trick, right? It's, you saw there was nothing in the hat, but I just pulled a rabbit out. You saw I was not a politician. You saw the poll said there's no way I'm going to beat any politician. You saw the Access Hollywood tape, me saying all these vulgar things about women. You've seen all the horrible press about me. You know who I am. I've shown you my little hands. But the turn was, I won the motherfucking election. Now, there's a third part. And we don't always get it. We're not always sure, because most magicians never tell that third part. And it's called the prestige. It's when a magician pulls the curtain back and says, you didn't really see what you thought you saw. Let me show you the secret sauce. Let me show you how I did it. Let me show you my trick. Trump clearly has never shown his trick. Liberals have been running crazy, scratching their heads, screaming into the ether, writing op-eds, going on MSNBC and CNN, and basically
Screaming it's not real.
Screaming it's not real, or the opposite, telling you how simple it is. It's this, it's that. Again, Scott Adams, a great mind, says he's got persuasive skills. Others are like, well, he's secretly God-fearing, so I love him. Others are like, he's a self-made millionaire. Others are like, oh, he's a businessman. Others are like, oh, he's got a machine behind him. Others are like, oh, he's good at social media. Others are like, he tells it like it is. Others are like, he's every man. Others are like, I see myself in him. Others are like, oh, he's like my dad, who was an authoritarian, who spanked. Bullshit. What if what 50% of people who support him, believe him, follow him, the 50% that are going to vote for him again this November, what if they know something nobody else does? That there is no prestige. There is no trick. Donald Trump is who he is. He has done what he said. He is who he claims to be. Nothing more, nothing less. And maybe it's because this guy is seemingly devoid of virtue, specifically righteousness, righteous indignation, that his voters feel comfortable, right? Because he doesn't judge them. He can't. He's got nothing. He's got no moral superiority. He can judge his rivals, but notice he hardly ever points out anybody's moral shortcomings. It's always, you're dumb, you're a rube, you're ugly, you're stupid.
Well, Biden is a sleaze.
Sleaze, sleepy.
No,
little.
I'm saying he says Biden's corrupt.
Yeah, but I'm saying morally, he never talks about voters, especially not his own, from a moral high ground. Again, because he can't. As Sam Harris said in his podcast last year, 50% of voters know Trump is a fat, bellicose, grab him in the pussy, Mexico's going to build the wall, Jesus. And again, like I've said, but he's there, Jesus. My diagnosis is Trump's a magician, except he's not using magic. Nelson, I appreciate you coming on today with me.
Yeah, it's a fun episode, man.
And I hope this message resonates with all of our listeners. I hope that everybody can take something from today. I know I have. And I hope all of the people from Abbeville, South Carolina know I love you and respect you, always have, always will. And I want Trump's voters, supporters, fans to know, man, I love you and respect you as well. And if and when Trump wins the next election, I'll shake your hand and say, congratulations. But I would ask you one thing. Always remember that just because I may sound a little different, I may look a little different, and I may believe things a little differently than you, we are all Americans. We are all citizens of this planet. We are all God's children.
Absolutely. And on that note, please, not just because Taylor Swift tells you to, but no matter who you vote for as a political scientist, please, this November, this March, get out there and cast your ballot for whoever you'd like.
Yeah, please do. We'll see you next time.